The United Kingdom government is one of those countries who adopted the ICSRC, wherein they applied the UN Convention of Human Rights. So, the following topics that we will tackle are what the UK government has implemented in combination of policies and legislation to give effect to the UN human rights treaties it has ratified. Actually, there are a lot of areas wherein the UK government apply the guidelines of ICSRC, but we only included the most important and relevant ones. First one is the application of ICSRC on business and economic, social, and cultural rights, particularly on the regulatory framework. The UK was the first UN member state to develop a national action plan to implement the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. This was updated in 2016 to reflect actions taken by the UK government in helping businesses to fulfill their responsibility to respect human rights. The NAP sets out several actions taken by the UK government to promote access to remedy, while it includes supporting access to remedy for human rights abuses by business enterprises through its employment tribunals for cases of labor rights, avenues for civil law claims, and specific criminal law provisions. The next one is the application of ICSRC, particularly on legal liabilities of companies. The Modern Slavery Act of 2015 requires certain businesses to produce a statement demonstrating steps they have taken to ensure there is no modern slavery in their businesses or supply chains. And all government departments publish their first individual annual modern slavery statements in 2021. The UK government also developed an online registry for modern slavery statements, so following a public consultations on measures to strengthen the legislation, the UK government has also extended reporting to public bodies in order to create private and public sector parity and enhance transparency by developing an online registry for modern slavery statements. So the section 172 of the Companies Act of 2006 makes it clear that in fulfilling their duty to promote the success of the company, directors must consider the interests of their employees and the impact on the community of the company's operations. The amendments to the UK Companies Act in 2013 required listed companies to report on material human rights impacts relevant to the businesses in their annual report, and further amendments of the Act in 2016 strengthened the requirement to provide a fuller framework for strategic reporting, including on due diligence arrangements. The UK is also signatory to the 1976 OECD Declaration on International Investment and MNES, which adopted the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. And those guidelines are a set of voluntary principles and standards for businesses to conform to responsible business practices, including human rights, labor standards, and environment. The third application of ICSCR on international development cooperation, wherein on this area, it focuses on the field of education. While we see the state as the guarantor of quality basic education for all, it doesn't need to be the only financer or provider of education services. The UK takes a pragmatic approach to supporting education, wherein our priority is to ensure children get the education they deserve. Where state provision is weak or non-existent, the UK will work with non-state providers, including paid for schools, to provide an education to children who would otherwise get none. This includes public-private partnerships, leverage private sectors financing for education, or working with governments to strengthen regulation and oversight to non-state provisions. All of these elements of supports are subject to rigorous social assessments to ensure that they do not lead to adverse social consequences. The UK government also takes monitoring and evaluation of policies and projects very seriously, and all elements of support provided to receiving countries are subject to rigorous social assessments to ensure that they do not lead to adverse social consequences. We further work to ensure that individuals are able to raise concerns about violations of their rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights with their respective countries. The UK's approach to addressing violations will vary depending on the receiving country and particular project. Lastly, the last application of ICS-SCR is on the equality between men and women. The UK government introduced regulations requiring large employers to publish the differences in average salaries and bonuses for men and women, which have been essential in motivating employers to recognize and eliminate gaps in their own organizations, and also look at the drivers behind this. More broadly, the introductions of new regulations in this area has captured the attention of the media and individuals, sparking real discussions about equal pay and the gender pay gap in homes and workplaces, and focusing attention on improving equality in workplace. So in Wales, so by the way, don't be kanang kahibong nga we will mention Wales, Scottish government, and Northern Ireland government here because the UK is mainly comprises of the Wales, England, Northern Ireland, and the Scotland. So going back, in Wales, the Diversity in Democracy program supports the provision of mentoring and legislative change to ensure local elected representatives have access to family absence provision and executive job sharing. As part of the implementation of the Well-being of Future Generations Act of 2015, the Welsh government are consulting on national milestones ar- around the elimination of the pay gap for gender, disability, and ethnicity by 2050, and the employment gap in Wales with a focus on raising labor market participation of underrepresented groups. Then, the Scottish government introduced the Gender Representation on Public Boards of Scotland Act of 2018, which sets a gender representation objective for the boards of listed Scottish public authorities that 50% of the board's non-executive members are women, and it requires appointing the persons and public authorities to take certain steps towards achieving the objective. In March 2019, the Scottish government published a Fairer Scotland for Women Gender Pay Gap Action Plan, which sets out actions to address the gender pay gap by looking at the drivers and influences on the gender pay gap at each stage of women's life. And lastly, the Scottish government funds Equate Scotland to support the recruitment, retention, return, and success of women into STEM jobs where they significantly underrepresented. As part of their work, the Scottish Government Fund Equate Scotland to deliver the CareerWise program, which offers female undergraduates paid work placement with STEM employers. Then lastly, the Northern Ireland Executive has implemented the following actions to improve gender equality. Number one, the Code of Practice for Ministerial Public Appointments in Northern Ireland. Number two, a gender equality strategy, GES, is being developed. Number three, a strategy to tackle violence against women and girls is being developed. Number four, and the last, the New Beginnings program seeks to increase the participation of women in economic life and entrepreneurship.